Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Lizette Boda. I am a district representative for the Office of Congresswoman Escobar. And today we are hosting a informative webinar with the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs. And we will be having a presentation with some room for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A and we will get to those questions. So thank you so much for joining us today. And now I will hand it over to our first presenter, Olivia.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Lizette. Good morning, good morning, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us to talk about the Office of Justice Programs and some funding opportunities for your community. So my name is Sunny Schnitzer. I'm a policy advisor with the Bureau of Justice Assistance on the Communities, Courts, and Strategic Partnerships team. So before we jump into today's webinar, I'll spend a couple of minutes sharing a few quick details about the Office of Justice Programs and about BJA specifically. Okay, next slide. Sorry, next slide. So just to give you a quick overview, so as Lizette mentioned, we'll be first talking about some of the funding opportunities at the Bureau of Justice Assistance. We'll give that overview, as I mentioned, talk through a few examples of some of the funding that has been available in fiscal year 22. Many of our grant programs have closed, but a handful are still out in the field. So we're going to talk through a few of those. And then we'll talk about the resources that are available to grant applicants to assist either with technical or content-specific questions. And we'll have a Q&A section. Okay, so first, the Office of Justice Programs is a federal agency that provides federal leadership, grants, training and technical assistance, and other resources to improve the nation's capacity to prevent and reduce crime, to assist victims and enhance the rule of law by strengthening the criminal and juvenile justice systems. Its 6 program offices support state, local, and tribal crime-fighting efforts, fund thousands of victim service programs, help communities manage sex offenders, address the needs of youth in our system and children in danger, and provide vital research and data to the public and to justice agencies. So as I mentioned, there are 6 components within the Office of Justice Programs. Those include the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which is where I work, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, the Office for Victims of Crime, which you'll hear more about later in the presentation, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking, or the SMART Office. Okay, next slide. So BJA specifically was created in 1984 to reduce violent crime, create safer communities, and reform our nation's criminal justice system. BJA strengthens the nation's criminal justice system and helps America's state, local, and tribal jurisdictions in these efforts through a variety of mechanisms. BJA works with communities, governments, nonprofit organizations in a number of ways, including investing in diverse funding streams to accomplish goals, promoting research and developing guidance to partners to deliver what works, and by creating tools and products to build capacity and improve outcomes. And then finally, and this is incredibly important to BJA's mission and goals, is by forging strong partnerships where we consult, connect, and convene. Okay, next slide. So just very quickly, there are 2 types of grants that BJA and typically OJP deliver, and those are discretionary or formula grants. So our discretionary grants are awarded directly by OJP to recipients. They're typically going to be opened up and applicants will apply directly, in this case, to BJA for these. They're most often awarded on a competitive basis. That means they'll go through peer review. They'll be open to a broad swath of applicants, and the applicants will go through various steps of review to ensure that they meet eligibility requirements and that their peers in the field feel this is a strong program to fund. The other option is a formula program. These are usually administered and managed by state administering agencies, or SAAs, or other BJA approved fiscal agents. Most of these are on a non-competitive basis, and the distribution of these funds is eligible to eligible recipients is usually statutorily defined. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I want to give a few examples, and I say a few because BJA has many grant programs available. To the extent I'm able to in the question and answer session, answer questions about the any other programs that you want to discuss, I'm happy to do so. I'm going to talk about a few programs that I know a little bit about, and some I know very well. But certainly this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. There will be links later in the presentation to sites that you can visit to learn more about all of our available funding and our past funding as well. All right. So first I wanted to highlight the Adult Drug Court Discretionary Program. So the Department of Justice began supporting drug courts over 25 years ago. This program supports state, local, and tribal governments and courts to implement drug courts that effectively integrate evidence-based substance use disorder treatment, mandatory drug testing, sanctions and incentives, et cetera. This program, as I mentioned, has been operating out of the Department of Justice and has been supporting these efforts for 25 years. And it supports significant investments in rural areas in particular to enhance access to treatment and recovery support. Okay, next slide. So in fiscal year 22, BJA has approximately $83 million available for awards. These are going to be competed in, or they're being competed in multiple categories, including one that is about kind of planning and implementation, right, when you're starting up a drug court. A second category that's really focusing on enhancing existing programs, and a third program that focuses on statewide systems. Eligibility is typically going to be limited to state, local, or county governments, or Native American tribal governments, or others that are applying on behalf of a drug court. Okay, next slide. So the Matthew Shepard and James Byrne Jr. Hate Crimes Program is a relatively new program at BJA. This was first awarded in fiscal year 21. In fiscal year 22, we are competing this program again. So this program is really designed to support state, local, and tribal law enforcement and prosecution agencies in their outreach and education to the public, to victims, and to their staff about hate crimes. This program is really focused on equipping our justice agencies with the tools they need to carry out investigations, to identify and report hate crimes, and to prosecute hate crimes. And importantly, this program also really encourages partnership with community partners, public outreach, and as I mentioned, the reporting of hate crimes. Next slide. So this fiscal year, BJA has approximately $8.7 million available for awards. One thing I will flag on this program, the maximum award amount available is $400,000. This program is limited by statute to $100,000 per award per year of a grant. So for this particular program, BJA is accepting applications that will run for 48 months, so 4 years, and again, a maximum of $100,000 per fiscal year. As I mentioned, eligible applicants are those state, local, and tribal law enforcement and prosecution agencies. Okay, next slide. The Emmett Till Cold Case Investigation and Prosecution Program, similarly to the Matthew Shepard and James Byrne Jr. Hate Crimes Program, is also available for state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies and prosecution agencies. This program is designed to provide state, local, and tribal justice agencies with the tools to carry out really complex investigations on cold case civil rights related homicides. So these are largely going to be focused on racially motivated homicides that occurred prior to 1980. Importantly, this particular program, while it does focus on investigation and prosecution, it's also really focused on creating a space for reconciliation and resolution of these historical cases. So while a case may not necessarily be able to come to prosecution, there is still some historical reconciliation that can occur through this process and through this program. So this program, again, another relatively new program to BJA, is often executed in collaboration with the Department of Justice's Community Relations Service to really kind of support some of the services and reconciliation work for families, victims, and other stakeholders. Next slide. So this fiscal year, BJA will have approximately $2.2 million available for awards. The estimated average award amount is $500,000. As I mentioned, the eligible applicants are state, local, and tribal law enforcement and prosecution agencies. One thing I do want to flag here, while those are the eligible applicants, applicants are strongly encouraged to partner with community-based organizations, historical societies, and other partners who may bring expertise to these, again, really complex historical cases. And those partnerships are strongly encouraged through this program. Okay, next slide. Next up, we have the Comprehensive Opioid, Stimulant, and Substance Abuse Program, or COSAP. So COSAP was developed as a part of the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act legislation. Its purpose is to provide financial and technical assistance to states, units of local government, and Indian tribal governments to develop, implement, or expand comprehensive efforts to identify, respond to, treat, and support those who are impacted by illicit opioids, stimulants, or other drugs of abuse. While the opioid epidemic has dominated headlines, communities throughout the nation have been impacted by diverse drug use patterns, including stimulants and other illicit substances. The cornerstone of this program is its emphasis on partnership and collaboration across the public health, behavioral health, and public safety sectors. Effective community responses leverage the combined expertise of each of these three disciplines and rely upon unified and coordinated strategies to address these. COSAP is committed to supporting 4 key programmatic areas. The first is promoting public justice and supporting access to recovery services in the criminal justice system. The second is strengthening the collection and sharing of data across systems to understand and address the the impact of illicit substance use and misuse. The third is to align and maximize resources across systems and leverage diverse program funding. And the fourth is to prevent substance use and misuse. Next slide. So This fiscal year, BJA will have approximately $132 million available for awards. Again, those will be given out in several different categories. So the first will be local sites. Those award amounts will be anywhere from $1 million to $1.6 million. And category 2 really focuses on state-based sites and state-based approaches. Those awards will be up to $6 million each. Okay, next slide. All right, so the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, or JAG, or BJAG, as some people may know it. The JAG program is really kind of one of BJA's flagship programs. This program is the primary provider of federal criminal justice funding to states and units of local government. Through this opportunity, BJA will award JAG program funds to eligible states as described in the state JAG program solicitation. As you can see on the screen, we expect more than 1,000 applications this year, and we will have roughly $290 million for awards. One thing I want to flag for the JAG program, as I mentioned at the start of this call, many of OJP's grant solicitations have closed. If memory serves, I believe JAG is open for a few more days. So if you haven't gotten your JAG application in and you're an eligible applicant, I would encourage you to take a look at that. Okay, next slide. So I do want to take just a very quick minute to talk a little bit about BJA's training and technical assistance capacity. So part of the reason I want to flag this, as you've heard me say a few times through this presentation, OJP's grant cycle tends to have kind of a narrow window. So we may have a program solicitation up for 45 or 60 days. But that doesn't mean that training and technical assistance is not available outside of those times. So I did want to talk just very quickly about Ntac. So next slide. So the National Training and Technical Assistance Center is a program with BJA that really connects state, local, and tribal justice agencies in need of assistance with really any type of specialized request with national experts to help on those topics. So the biggest thing I want to flag here, this may be a specific request to focus on reducing violent crime or drug-related crime. This assistance, while it may not be direct dollars, that expertise is provided through BJA's Ntac at no cost. And that specialized kind of training and guidance can go directly to the requester if approved. Next question, or next slide. So I've listed on the slide some of the available services from Ntac. So this includes, as I mentioned, certainly training, guidance from others in the field, and that can include sometimes peer-to-peer site visits, learning from other agencies who may have experience in something that you're looking to do. The sharing of information, research, really helping with strategic planning. These are all things that are available through Ntac. It's a very valuable resource. And I've listed on the screen, but I'll say it as well. If you go to bjatta.bja.ojp.gov, you can learn a little bit more about Ntac. Next slide. Okay. I'll be very quick on these next few slides. Just wanted to kind of walk through some of the resources if you're either currently applying to one of BJA's grants or OJP's grants, or if you're looking to do so in the future. There are several different systems. Sometimes they can be a little tough to navigate, so wanted to flag some of the resources. Next slide. So first, I wanted to kind of direct everyone who's on the line to OJP's Funding Resource Center. and really kind of offer some guidance for anyone who may be new or may need a refresher on what OJP and DOJ's grants financial requirements are, and some of that training. I highly recommend doing that in advance of applying for or receiving any OJP funding. So there are resources on the screen where you can learn a little bit more about available funding. You can also learn about the opportunities for the financial management training. And finally, you can learn about the application guide. Next slide. So most of BJA's programs include a webinar where each program gets a much more in-depth and much more experienced presenter than I am, who's an expert in that field, who can talk to potential applicants about the program, about the solicitation, and answer questions for prospective applicants. So if you're looking to apply for a specific program, I'd highly recommend going through the library listed here on the screen to find either a current or past webinar to learn a little bit more about the programs. Next slide. So BJA is and OJP, we're regularly making updates about programs, be that availability of funding, maybe extended deadlines, but also some of the really important and exciting work coming out of each of these programs. And we really want to elevate the work that our state, local, and tribal partners are doing. I'd recommend that you follow us on social media. We have a Facebook presence, Twitter presence. I think now we have YouTube presence as well. And you can always also learn about funding opportunities, publications, and our initiatives on BJA's website, bja.ojp.gov. And next slide. We're coming down to the wire here. Just a quick note, if anyone is currently applying for programs and you're having any challenges with grants.gov, I have some resources listed on the slide where you can reach out and get some technical assistance with grants.gov. Next slide. The same is true for Just Grants. So if you're currently working on this process and have some questions about Just Grants, you can reach out. And it looks like the slides will be shared after this, so I'll try to go through these quickly. And next slide. All right, and then the last thing I would recommend is if you're going through this process and you have anything that is not a technical question, to reach out to the OJP Response Center, and someone will get back to you about questions with a specific solicitation shortly after reaching out. All right, next slide. This is just all of the information from the last 3 slides combined, so we can go to the next slide, and I think that's it for me. All right. So I am happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Sunny. So we do have a question in the Q&A from an attendee. They say, I'm new to the grant field. May I get a copy of the PowerPoint? I can share the resources after, or if that's fine with you all, we can also share the PowerPoint.
That's certainly fine from BJA. Jeff, I'll defer to you for.
Great. Absolutely. We can share all resources, slides, whatever you need.
All right. Any other questions?
That was the only question we have so far.
Great.
Great. All right. In the interest of time, I'll start now. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Nelson. I'm a senior analyst in the operations staff in the Office for Victims of Crime. I'm joined by my colleague, Sharon Fletcher, who's going to be talking about some law enforcement specific programs that we offer every year. But I thought it'd be helpful to provide some context about our high level funding, because our funding, who can apply, how it works, is drastically different than what Olivia was just talking about with BJA. If you can just go to the first slide. Thank you. So we operate, I don't know if you're familiar, we operate what's called the Crime Victims Fund. This was established back in the 80s after the Volca Act, the Victims of Crime Act. This act created this general fund. Go to the next slide. So an overview. So this is not tax, the funding that we give all of our victim service and victim assistance programs around the country, it is not taxpayer funds. It is not appropriated funds. It's completely different. It's offender and fee-based funds. So the DOJ, all of the litigating components, think of all the U.S. attorney's offices around the country, think of all the antitrust division, the criminal division, all of these, they levy fines and penalties to individuals and companies. That pot of money, that money goes into this pot, which is called the Crime Victims Fund, which we can in turn spend on victim assistance programs. It's actually a wonderful idea that was created, like I said, back in the 80s by President Reagan after the Volca Act was passed. You can go to the next slide. So what do? OVC, the Office of Victims of Crime, manages billions of dollars, billions. We have state formula grants to victim assistance and compensation programs, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. We have discretionary grant programs that provide direct services to victims, training and technical assistance to grant awards. And we have national large scope demonstration projects. We also are manage the largest amount of federal funding for victims of human trafficking. That's a separate appropriated amount, so I'm not going to get too much in the weeds of that today, just because I wanted to speak about the Crime Victims Fund. And we also have a dedicated stream of funds now that are specific to tribal and Indian country around in the United States. It's part of the Crime Victims Fund, which I will get into. And we also provide a lot of funding to our partners at the FBI, U.S. attorneys, EPA, ENRD, National Park Service, for their federal victim assistance programs, or victim specialists. There's victim specialists in every single field office, every single U.S. attorney's office that ultimately is funded by us and managed by us. And we also provide a large amount of training and technical assistance to build the capacity of the victim services field. Next slide. So how does it work? I wanted to provide this slide just to give you some context of how much money is actually going into the fund. This is the amounts going back to fiscal year 2007. You'll see in 2017, 2014, it was in the $4, $5, $6 billion we're collecting from all of those criminal fines and prosecution fees. The last 4 or 5 years, we've only collected about $500 to $600 million. We're hopeful that there was a recent passage of what's called the Volca Fix, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but that allowed fines and fees from non-prosecutorial agreements to come into the Crime Victims Fund. So we have multiple streams of fines and fees coming in to the Crime Victims Fund that we in turn can fund victim assistance and victim service programs. Go to the next slide, Byrne. So how does it work? So when we're collecting all this money, Congress just doesn't give us whatever we collect every year. What they'll do is they'll set the amount that we can spend in that bucket of funds. So if there's $12 billion, $10 billion in the fund, Congress will say, okay, you can spend $2 billion this year, $3 billion this year. It's to allow stability and make sure that we don't go through all the funds in one fiscal year. Just this past year, the one that we're in right now, fiscal year 2022, the Crime Victims Fund obligation cap, appropriation cap, Congress set it at $2.6 billion. And then we have multiple statutory set-asides, which I'm going to get into in the next slide. So this is kind of where I think this graph, which is also available on our website along with all of the resources and funding opportunities at ovc.gov, which I encourage all to go there. This chart depicts the actual balance in the fund, how much we've collected net versus how much we're spending each year. The line chart you can see there shows how much Congress is allowing us to spend each year. So you'll notice that Congress, they've set the cap at $2, $3, $4, $5 billion the last 4 years, but our balance has been trending down just because we haven't been collecting the last 4 years worth of receipts and fines and fees into the fund. So we're on a little bit of a downturn, but we're very hopeful that there will be more fines and fees and big settlements coming into the fund in the next few months. So how does the funding work? Immediately, once Congress sets the appropriation cap, immediately there's $50 million available for what we call the emergency reserve, the anti-terrorism and emergency reserve. This is available for all of the mass violence incidences and events that occur. We've given grants out to the communities. Think of Newtown, Orlando, the Pulse nightclub. We're probably going to give one to Buffalo and Uvalde in the next few years. And this is to reimburse them for funeral costs, burial costs, mental health costs, all of the victims and surrounding family members that may have been affected and traumatized by that mass violence event. Now, there are, with this $50 million immediately set aside for these instances, there is a limited law enforcement overtime expenses that are allowable, such as death, where there, death notifications, crime scene cleanup, explaining the crime scene to the family, because usually they're the first ones on the ground. So there is a law enforcement component of this that they can apply for funds. Next slide. So as I said before, Congress sets the limit every year. They set the how much we can spend, the Office of Victims of Crime, on our victim assistance programs. Then they also put in the language what we have to do with that funding before it trickles down to the local communities. So immediately they say you have to give a certain amount to Health and Human Services for their children's justice assistance grants. We give I mentioned we give the U.S. attorneys and the FBI positions, victim assistance professionals and positions to deal with the victims on the ground in every single field office and district office in the United States. I think that's over, I think we're pushing about 400 positions just for those two, right around there. There's a tribal set-aside component of it. Congress will say 3 to 5% of the money that we give you, that we set, immediately must go to tribes for their victim assistance programs. That's relatively new. That was passed in 2018. We give the Inspector General of the Department of Justice $10 million to manage us. They're the ones managing us as we oversee all of the 1,700 active grants that OVC has currently right now. And then we also give money to the Office of Violence Against Women for their victim assistance programs as well. We've done that going back to 2015. I think we've given them about $3 billion, a little over $3 billion for their victim assistance programs. After that, we run what's called a formula where we give awards out to the states and territories, 56 states and territories, for them to make supplemental micro sub-grants from the money we give them for a variety of things which I'm going to get into. And then the final piece of the puzzle is the 5% remaining, which is up to at the discretion of our director, the Assistant Attorney General, and what's in the spirit of the Attorney General and the administration for their priorities, whether it could be, and I'm going to get into it in a little bit, but it could be a variety of things: elder fraud, law enforcement, domestic violence, and I'll get into that momentarily. Next slide. So I want to talk about a little bit about what's called the Volca formula funding compensation. So I mentioned after all of those statutory set-asides, we run what's called the formula, which gives states money for two types of grants. One of them, and this is all formula funding, one of them is for compensation, and this is for direct reimbursement to crime victims in their states and territories for things such as medical costs, mental health counseling, lost wages, funeral and burial costs. The chart below shows specifically how much money we've given to all 56 states and territories over the last four years. So it's in the hundreds of millions every single year. Back in 2021, last year, we pay on the state awards, we paid out more than 216,000 claims stemming from OVC funding. I also want to stress too that, I mean, you can stay on this slide, Brian, but that the law enforcement officers, like, as I said, they're usually the first ones to speak to victims following a crime. So it's a vital component that it's a connection between the justice system and victim support services, that victim compensation is part of the equation. Okay, this is wonderful. So the other side of the coin, we give states money for victim compensation. We also give them funding for what's called victim assistance. Now, this is where we give each state in the millions of dollars we give each state. You can see in the chart here that we've given the states billions of dollars every year. We give them money so they can make local sub-awards in the communities for a variety of direct services related to victims every day. We've given, I think there's over 11,000 active sub-awards in the country stemming from our grants to these states. So we support 59% of every single victim service organization in the country based on the latest census, our national census. So we provide a ton of funding that the states then open up competitively under their own solicitation. Next slide. So I mentioned after the 5% and after the Congress sets the appropriations cap, after Congress takes out the statutory set-asides, and after we give all of our, whatever's left over, 95% of that goes to the states for assistance programs, local for subawards, and compensation directly to victims. We also have 5% remaining that are director priority initiatives. So this could be a variety of things: domestic violence, sexual assault. We funded several opioid programs that I think Olivia mentioned. One of the drug programs that BJA manages. We also manage a piece of that every year. Elder victims of crime. We have solicitations every year. All of our current solicitations, I think 95% of them have closed. We're usually posting them around the springtime. I encourage you all to follow our Twitter feed, follow our Facebook feed, go to our website, ovc.gov, so you can get information about whenever we're posting opportunities under this discretionary bucket. We fund many hotlines: elder fraud, domestic violence, sexual assault hotlines. We had a hate crime solicitation that just went out last year that we posted again this year. We have hospital-based services, and we also have LE-based direct victim services, which I think closed. I mean, Sharon will correct me. It closed that solicitation is usually open for 60 to 90 days, and I think it closed a couple weeks ago. All right, the next slide. And on that note, I kind of give you a broad overview of the funding and the different types of programs that OVC manages. Now, Sharon, who's an expert in these topics, she's going to dive even deeper into certain discretionary programs that we have funded in the past, that we're funding right now, and that we're going to continue to fund every single year.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Hello, everyone. I'm Sharon Fletcher, and I am working in OVC, and I manage a number of initiatives that support law enforcement and victim services. So I'm just going to walk through a few of those with you all rather this afternoon. As Jeff mentioned, we don't have current solicitations open right now. However, as Olivia mentioned as well, we do still have technical assistance and training available year-round, both online resources and directly from our partners at the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Next slide, please. So very early on, OVC recognized that law enforcement is a very important partner in providing victim services because, as Jeff mentioned, they're very often they are the first point of contact for crime victims, correct? Because they are definitely meeting everyone when those calls are made and when crimes are reported. So in fact, very often law enforcement is the only contact that most victims have. So they are a very critical partner in making sure that victims are connected to services. And so what we've learned through the years, working with law enforcement very closely, is that there are some critical, not only is it critical, but there's some clear benefits to making these connections. The first one might seem obvious, but improved victim outcomes. But it's become very clear that connecting victims to supportive services has better outcomes. And those improved outcomes can range from a burglary victim that's able to have their locks replaced and windows repaired to a deaf victim of sexual violence having a sign language interpreter made available to accompany them during a forensic exam and along the way and various steps in the criminal justice process. So just having that critical support for all types of victims, because we understand people represent many categories, right? And they need those support so that they can better participate in the criminal justice process. Another clear benefit is increased community trust and confidence in police. And this is particularly important these days because it's another way for police to really demonstrate their clear benefit to the communities, right? Because they're able to show their impact in people's day-to-day lives. And that impact can be a benefit, not just to the victims, but it also has been proven to improve increased job satisfaction for officers and professional staffs in law enforcement agencies. So it's a win-win on both sides for both the officers themselves, as well as the residents and community members, because they know that they're supported in those tough times. Another clear benefit has been increased and improved victim participation in the criminal justice process. So that goes right back to the example I just gave with the deaf victim of sexual violence. If they're not able to have the support of a sign language interpreter and to have someone there that can communicate with them effectively, they probably won't be able to participate in the criminal justice process, and they probably won't put themselves through that. It's already a very traumatic experience for the individual. So if they're not provided with that support and care, again, they are less likely to participate. And when we do get better participation from victims, it's been proven and shown that better victim participation increases cases being resolved and also increases the likelihood that offenders general are arrested and prosecuted. And then it also, having victim services and law enforcement also provides some really good additional tools and resources to support departments themselves. So we know it's a very tough job that law enforcement has, and they can use all the resources and support necessary that available. And this is one that can really provide some critical supports for law enforcement and departments. So of course, I will say though that law enforcement can't do all of this alone, even with those victim services professionals on staff. So it is important that law enforcement is also collaborating with those victim serving organizations that are based in the community. So those partnerships with community organizations are also very important to creating that network of support and collaboration. So with that, OVC has developed a number of initiatives that emphasize the importance of having victim services embedded in law enforcement settings. So I'll take a few minutes to talk over these three you see on the screen here today. I'll start with our Enhancing Law Enforcement Response to Victims. The International Association of Chiefs of Police, whom I mentioned, been a wonderful partner to OVC for many years, and I will note that they are our partners for all three of the initiatives I will go over, including Enhancing Law Enforcement Response to Victims, or ELERV. So we love an acronym in the government, as you've probably noticed. So ELERV is a strategy that law enforcement can use to implement victim-centered responses across their department. ELERV the strategy includes the entire department and goes beyond just creating a victim services unit. And I say that specifically because we understand how the strategy really enforces how every person in a department, from the person who is working at your registration desk or receptionist desk up front to your dispatchers who are taking the calls, from emergency calls into the community to the law enforcement officers on the street. They all have a role in improving and enhancing those victim services and support. So the strategy really lays out a clear strategy for how all of those pieces can become more victim-centered and improving that response to victims across the board. Now, OVC and IACP have worked to update this strategy that we relaunched rather. It was initially started in the early 2000s, and we recently updated the strategy with additional resources, tools, videos. We just in this past month added some additional resources that can help guide you through the online videos and lessons a little more easily now that we all are living a bit more in a virtual world, as is demonstrated by this afternoon's call. So we're able to make that a little bit more user-friendly for those who are interested in doing so. And the big piece I want to emphasize here for ELERV is that departments are able to implement any piece of this strategy without additional funding. It really is focused on using what you have better and working smarter. And not harder. So it really does have a lot of that piece, that philosophy in there. And again, you are able to access training and technical assistance from IACP on the ELERV strategy and how you can bring that victim-centered approach to police departments in your area. Moving on, I'll start talk about our law enforcement-based victim services program. So we started LEV, our Law Enforcement Victim Services program, back in 2018 to increase the number of law enforcement agencies working to either expand or enhance victim services in their departments. To date, OVC is funding around just over 70 LEV sites across the country, and those 70 sites are split between small, medium, large, and tribal law enforcement agencies. I think we've received, I think we funded several rounds of sites in both FY18 when we started, FY19, and FY20. We haven't funded any directly since 20 rather, but we did put out funding on this year to kind of move the emphasis of funding the sites directly to our training and technical assistance partner. So that approach will be different, but the philosophy will be the same. The big piece that LEV really brought to the table is that we have, through this initiative and working again with IACP, been able to develop a host of resources that departments can use to run and operate, start victim services departments in their law enforcement agencies. So when I say they've developed so many resources, from key considerations documents to templates that can be used for brochures and different pamphlets. There's just a very strong number of resources that have been developed to really help on the day-to-day pieces. We have put together some additional literature around ethics in victim services and other confidentiality and other issues that come up quite frequently as our victim services professionals are working directly with officers to support victims. So there's a host of information available there, both online, and again, you are able to reach out to IACP for additional technical assistance directly on those supports. And then I should also note, my next slide will have the links to all of the information that you'll be able to find online for these 3 initiatives. But then the last initiative I wanted to cover is our Vicarious Trauma Response Initiative. Now, it was launched in 2019, and our goal was to expand what we learned since our Vicarious Trauma Toolkit was released back in earlier mid-2000s, I think, or early 2000s. So the Vicarious Trauma Toolkit was really focused on providing supports to first responders who are, of course, very much affected by the traumatic situations that they're dealing with, because we all have our personal stories, trauma histories, and what we've been dealing with personally, but it is of course, affecting us when we're dealing with very traumatic situations every day. So we want to make sure that our first responders, our law enforcement officers, our fire department personnel, those of that nature, we want to make sure that those people are healthy and ready to be there beyond the job and be their best selves at work and able to respond accordingly without having additional negative side effects from the heaviness and stresses of their day-to-day. And so that was really very much the focus of our Vicarious Trauma Toolkit. Well, since the toolkit was released, and we found that the impact of the work and feedback from the field, rather, about the impact of the work indicated that there needed to be more that needed to be done to address vicarious trauma among other allied professionals that were also supporting victims, such as professionals in schools, hospitals, and other settings. So we launched VTRI in an effort to ensure that all providers and organizations understand the impact of vicarious trauma and benefit from workplaces and communities of practice that promote their health, well-being, and resilience. So once again, IACP is the TA provider for this initiative, VTRI, and they are currently working with 12 sites across the country that are participating in the initiatives. The sites are all working to develop more collaborative approaches, cross-training, and awareness around vicarious trauma in their communities. And they are also looking to develop additional tools and resources that will be able to support organizations that are looking to address vicarious trauma in their agencies beyond what was already involved in the toolkit. So with that, we can move to our next slide. And so these are the links where you can find resources on all three initiatives. Again, there is a host of information available for all three. And again, you are able to reach out to ICP for additional training and technical assistance for all three of these. And I believe this is my last slide. Oh, certainly feel free to reach out to Jeff or myself if you have questions about anything OVC that we've covered today. We'd be happy to help you answer any questions you might have.
Yep. And I just want to keep reiterating to go to our website for available funding if you ever want to see either our active solicitations that are open or just see prior year awards that we've given out, kind of that, because that can help dictate and tell the story of where we would fund moving forward, the types of programs that we fund.
Okay, thank you so much. We don't have any additional questions at the moment. So attendees, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Or you can also reach out to me via email, and I can try to get the answers for you if any questions come to mind after the presentation. Or you can reach out to Sharon or Jeff or Sunny with any questions as well. So this concludes our webinar presentation. But before I let everyone go, I just really want to thank Sharon, Jeff, Sunny, and Brian so much for your time and for presenting this really informative information. You all did an amazing job. So thank you so much. And yes, this concludes our webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Enjoy the